Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar names on the panel there and also familiar faces. For those who don't know, my name is Sean Christopholi, and I am the Chief Grants Officer for the New Jersey Historical Commission. I am pleased to be joined today by my colleague, Nicole Premiani, who is the Chief Programs Officer of the Historical Commission. I believe the Executive Director, our Executive Director, Sarah Curitin, will be joining us shortly as well. Thank you again for joining us for this online webinar for the New Jersey Historical Commission's Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion Grant Program. The DEAI Grant Program is our next critical step in our ongoing strategy to make New Jersey history more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to diverse 21st century residents and visitors. A quick note for everyone, there will be plenty of time to discuss the DEAI Grant Program generally, the guidelines specifically, and any other questions you may have in the workshop portion that will follow this presentation. First, however, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's session, Varissa McMickens Blair. We are thrilled Varissa agreed to join us today to lend her expertise on DEAI, offer insight into why it is vital to the future of New Jersey's history nonprofits. In doing so, everyone here today will get a better understanding of why the Historical Commission has taken the important step to make DEAI a cornerstone of its grant programs moving forward. Varissa McMickens Blair is a seasoned nonprofit and arts education professional with nearly 30 years of experience. She has led successful programming and volunteer efforts in urban, suburban, and rural communities across the nation. Varissa has been instrumental in growing organizations, hiring and training teaching artists and educators, and developing and designing new programs for many years. She is the founder and executive consultant of Now Wellspring Consulting, which provides a variety of organizational and business services.
Wait, what did you say? I'm listening to a Zoom call.
Sorry about that. In this capacity as the founder of Now Wellspring Consulting, she has worked on DEAI planning, program and project management, grant writing, strategic planning, interim and surrogate executive leadership, social media content management, and a host of other professional offerings. Varissa is the past executive director of the Roebling Museum, and it was in that capacity that I had the pleasure of first meeting her. She has served as director of Greater Philadelphia's Arts Rising Initiative, a collaborative effort led by the Philadelphia Education Fund, the Fleischer Art Memorial, and Public Citizens for Children and Youth. Varissa also worked as executive director of the DC Arts and Humanities Education Collaborative in Washington, DC, and she has developed regional replication program sites across the nation as assistant director of the Wolf Trap Institute for Early Learning Through the Arts. Needless to say, we are extremely grateful she is here today, and with that, it is my distinct pleasure to turn the webinar over to Varissa.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Nicole. Hi, Sarah. I saw Sarah pop into the meeting too. And hello, everybody. How are you? So I know a lot of faces and names here. I'm excited to be back in your presence. I've been really lucky, blessed really throughout this pandemic. I went into a new season of working as a consultant just before the pandemic hit, and have continued that work while also being at home, homeschooling my kids who are downstairs. So let's hope they are having enough fun that they don't need to come upstairs and join us. But it's been a real roller coaster ride. And it's been exciting to be able to do the work that I love with so many different kinds of people in and around our region. One of the things I have done consistently during the time that I have sort of transitioned from my work at the Roebling Museum, where I served as executive director, and before that was helped to manage during a transition time at the museum, and really started in programming there and working with the volunteers. But since that time, it's really been an amazing opportunity to work with folks on things that I love to do. Diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, training and planning is something that is so essential to where we are in our sort of makeup as a society. We need to be able to accept others as they are, bring them into our institutions, and work together to plan for a future that includes us all. And so I'm really excited to be able to share my ideas about that and some initial thoughts for those who may be considering, of course, becoming a part of this new program that's being offered by the New Jersey Historical Society. So I thank them for the chance to talk with you today. I'm going to share my screen, so give me just a second. We love technology and I've tested it out, so let's make sure it's working the way we want. All right. There we go. So today, I want to just introduce you to some of the ideas that will help us embrace diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in New Jersey history. Again, it's such an essential part of where we are societally, and as the keepers of that history, as the bearers of that, and as those who discover pieces of that history and find ways to interpret and share it with broad audiences from around the country. I think New Jersey history is ready to move forward into this new sort of space that we've come to in our society that is very welcoming. And to do that, you really do have to embrace the work of DEAI. So I'm going to introduce some things that I think make it a really important part of the work that we're doing and why it's about both planning and practice. But I want to begin where a lot of organizations have realized it's an important thing to do, to begin with acknowledging an important part of history for all of us. That's a land acknowledgement, honoring the native lands that we are upon here. For those who know, we are on Lenape-Hoking land, the homeland of the Lenni Lenape. And this is a wonderful definition or a wonderful statement that I actually was able to pull from our friends at Rutgers University and their equity inclusion programming. It's that we acknowledge the land on which we stand is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. Pay respect to the indigenous people throughout the Lenape diaspora, of past, present, and future. And we honor those that have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. I encourage everyone here to begin using those kinds of starting spaces and places as you do the work that you're doing in your programming, whether it is in person or virtual, as we've all been sort of, delved into this. We've all had to delve into this new virtual digital world of programming. It's a wonderful place to begin that is quite inclusive and helps to acknowledge not only the history and the land that we're on, but the people who are impacted by it. So I encourage you all to begin to look into adopting these kinds of ways to acknowledge the land and the people. When I talk to folks about beginning the work of DEAI planning, the starting place is often understanding what unconscious or implicit bias is. And the reason that we begin there is so that we begin on a shared footing and a shared space of understanding at a common place where we can begin that work by being introspective, looking within ourselves and at the biases that sometimes infiltrate our own decision-making, our own views of the world. So I wanted to share a couple of quotes that I have found from a wonderful professor, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. She leads trainings across the world on unconscious bias. She's an educator, historian, and a fantastic speaker. She's also an author. And one of the things she said that really has impacted and shaped the way that I think of DEAI planning is this, that when we do this work, there are certain baselines that people have to have. The first baseline is that you have to believe that racism is real. The next is that the number two is that they have to believe that they may be acting on it. That's a tough admission for some folks because we really believe that we are not racist, and you may not be, we may not be, but we all do carry bias within us. We have to look at that as a starting point for doing DEAI planning in order to do the planning and prepare for new practices in a way that's effective. There's another example of that she was able to share that I thought was really a helpful way to frame this work. So thinking about sharing and teaching history, she says that if you take an ethnic studies course and 1 week we're focusing on Mexican Americans and then the next we're focusing on American Indians, what you get is that people are engaged and less engaged depending on what group you're in. A very different approach would be to look across the common experiences of all people and pull all of those experiences to illustrate a point or an issue. I really think that that's relevant in the work that we're talking about, because unconscious bias allows us to sometimes push some things to the side that maybe ought to be centered in our thinking and in our preparation for action. I'm going to share the American Alliance of Museums definitions of a number of words that I think are common ground when you're working on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion training and doing planning and practice changes. First, the definition that AAM provides of unconscious bias is this, that unconscious bias refers to our automatic and often unspoken beliefs about various social groups. These are the hidden assumptions that also are referred to as implicit or unintentional biases. These influence how we judge others' competency. They shape our expectations for human interaction and form the basis for prejudicial action. Now, I have an extension of that to provide some context. I believe that unconscious or implicit bias is a set of personal and systemic prejudgments. They're perspectives and stereotypes that are held by one person or group or an entity. And those create social and societal imbalances by favoring one group rather than another. And these prejudgments engender an implicit sense of unfairness that benefits some while penalizing others. And the bias is often very subtle or stealthy, right? Because it's so deeply embedded and ingrained into the thought processes that we have, our actions and our decision-making. And it often does that to the benefit of some, while not to the benefit of others. And so I want us to understand that when we enter into talking about and working toward creating effective diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion plans, it's about more than just coming up with a plan that is on paper or on your computer or sits on a shelf. It really is about understanding the deeper reasons why bias happen and finding ways to create policies and procedures and take action in a way that really works to correct some of those biases. So there's some other common terms that I would like to share with you in terms of understanding diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. And again, these are pulled from the American Alliance for Museums. First of all, what is diversity? Diversity is all the ways that people are different at the same time, and it's also how we are the same at the individual and group levels, and how even when people appear the same, they still are different. Organizational diversity requires examining and questioning the very makeup of a group to ensure that the multiple perspectives that need to be present are actually represented. Equity. When AAM describes or defines equity, they describe it and define it as follows: that equity is the fair and just treatment of all members of a community. Equity requires commitment to strategic priorities, resources, respect, and civility, as well as ongoing action and assessment of progress toward achieving those specified goals. There's also a wonderful and clear, I think, definition of what accessibility is. Accessibility is giving equitable access to everyone along the continuum of human ability and experience. And accessibility encompasses the broader meanings of compliance and refers to how organizations make space for the characteristics that each person brings. Inclusion refers to the intentional or ongoing effort to ensure that diverse individuals participate in all aspects of organizational work, including decision-making. And it also refers to the way that diverse participants are valued as respected members of an organization and or a community. Now, while a truly inclusive group is necessarily diverse, a diverse group is not necessarily inclusive. I think that that's a really interesting distinction, and we'll talk some more about that in just a bit. So, the important thing here to take away from the beginnings of this will be a discussion. We're going to open that up. I see my son behind me. Thanks, sweetheart. So what I'd like to share is that when you think about going beyond awareness into action, it really becomes about something known as systems change. So I'd like us to stop before we go into a deeper dive of systems change. And I want to encourage everybody to grab a piece of paper or jot some notes down on your computer or your phone in your notes section. And let's take a look at something that will give us a chance to actually interact with each other, because I am certainly happy to talk all the rest of the day, but I would like to hear from you. And I think it's important that we do share this as do this as a shared experience. So you can type your thoughts in the chat. You can, raise your hand. And I know that Sean and Nicole are going to be looking to see if anybody wants to respond as we think about this. But I wanted to use this really interesting example that comes from using some illustrations related to The Giving Tree. It's a book a lot of folks are familiar with. Anybody know the book, The Giving Tree? Remember it from when you were a kid? And so the story of The Giving Tree, the synopsis of the book is basically that the book follows the life of an apple tree and a boy who develop a relationship with one another, and that the tree is very giving, and the boy evolves into a taking teenager, a middle-aged man, and then finally an elderly man. And despite the fact that the boy ages in the story, the tree continues to address him as boy for his entire life. So I think that that's one way to think about the framing of the story. The activity I want us to do is to take a few moments, take about 3 minutes, and let's take a look. I'm going to actually zoom in on each one of these panels so that you can see them. And the illustrations that you're seeing, sort of take from the illustrations of the book, but they add something, and we'll talk through them really quickly as we do this. The first thing is to think about what the subtle differences are when you observe these illustrations. When you take a look at them, what are the subtle differences that you see in the illustrations? And then I want you to jot down some ideas about why those differences might be relevant to diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion planning. So let's start by zooming in a bit. The nice thing is that we can actually do that. Cool. So as we do that, what I'd like to do is the panel basically says that this is a panel that represents inequality. You have the little boy in red. On one side, the apples are plentiful on that side of the tree. They're dropping down to him. And then the little boy with the question mark on the other side, sort of waiting. And he's got his little blue, outfit on, and he's waiting. He's looking up thinking, gee, when will the apples come to me? And that inequality is really about unequal access to opportunities. Then we have the idea of equality. And inequality, we're talking about evenly distributing the tools and assistance, right? So you see in this next panel that you have the tree still with all the apples plentiful on one side, less so on the other side. But now both boys have been given a bag to collect their apples, right? And a ladder so that they're both standing at the same level, closer to the tree, which we would hope would make it easier for them to both get the same amount or get a similar amount of the resources that are there. I'm going to zoom out. Let me show you this next section. So now we're going to talk a little bit about equity. In this illustration, equity is about custom tools that identify and address inequality. So now we've done something a bit different. While the tree is still plentiful on one side and not quite as much on the other side, now both boys have the tools, their bags, and their ladders, although the ladder on the right is higher in order to allow the boy to reach them in a much easier way. In this way, it provides the right tools that are needed, that are customized for the needs of the people who are impacted. And finally, there's a panel here about justice, right? Which takes us beyond equity into thinking about what it might take for us to really get to a place where it is in that space where everyone is able to get what they need using the tools that they need. So this is about fixing the actual system to offer equal access to both the tools and the opportunities. In this panel, you see that the apples are really much more evenly distributed around the tree. Both boys have their bags, both have a ladder to help them reach them, but the tree has been righted by pushing from one side and pulling on another, so that way there is really a much better sense that the system that was provided, the tree itself as system and all of those tools, has provided an opportunity for both to achieve. So take a few moments just to think about these panels and why they might be relevant to the work of creating diversity, equity, and inclusion planning. And when you're ready, feel free to pop some answers into the chat. We'll be taking a look at them to see if we can share those out. If you'd like to raise your hand and actually like to speak, you're more than welcome to. Remember, we're recording, so just feel comfortable doing that, and I'd love to hear your voices. All right. Any brave soul wish to give us their thoughts on these panels and what might be a bit different, what might be important about the conversation that we'd like to have about the differences, the subtle differences, and about the importance to the planning process?
I just want to say my chat is disabled.
Okay. Sean or Nicole, if it's possible to enable the chat, that would be wonderful. But Deborah, you can feel free to speak up. I'm happy to hear any thoughts that you have.
This is my first webinar for with a presenter. My background is healthcare, and as a strategic planner, grant writer, etc. So I love the concepts you're presenting here. And I look at this and I say, when it comes to equality, I'm thinking, well, everybody has the same thing, but wait a minute, you have all the same tools, but we just can't get the same outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a really, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate you being here. It is interesting to think about that. We think equality is the key. And sometimes equality, while it's an important part of the work, it doesn't always take us all the way where we need to be or where we want to be. And so that's the next part of thinking about what some of the things we might be able to do to move us beyond, equality into equity, into justice, into writing the systems. I see, folks should be able to write it or type in the chat now. Nicole has made sure it's available. So feel free to write in the chat if you'd like. And I'm going to start calling on folks. I'm going to do the teacher thing. Someone, anyone.
All right, I'm sorry I raised my hand, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to like jump in front of people. Well, I really think that museums in general, like where we have the resources to help educate, to help the community. And the problem with trying to achieve equality and equity is that, like, for example, in those pictures, the right side only has those 3 apples. It doesn't matter that eventually that side gets more tools and better tools to suit them. The resources aren't even there. For the case of the justice panel, the resources are spread evenly across the tree. And us as museums, we really have the ability to help pull and push those resources in directions for communities that really need that.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate your words and your thoughts on that. Thank you, Adriana. So I see in the chat, Jeremy, is it Jeremy Bingaman, has said that this throws me back to my college days when I had special education courses to help teachers meet students' needs. The statement that has always struck me is that fair is not always equal. Oh, yes. Excellent statement. Yes, this is true. I would have to agree. Paul Muir also wrote in our chat and says, stories are important. I would want to know the stories of each boy and from their perspective, what it felt like to be in their situation. I have to tell you, Paul, that's really so much a part of the work of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. Sometimes we miss the stories of the people that we're trying to impact. I also will put forward to everybody that this is more than a one side, right? We're not just talking about creating these kinds of plans to impact the folks who are who we feel are the maligned, right? The marginalized. We are talking about doing so for ourselves as well. So anyone else have a comment? Feel free, jump in. All right. I hear someone unmuted. Anyone?
Who's that?
Go ahead. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move forward. I would suggest that this is a really helpful, I see one more in the chat. Let's see. Laurel Porcelli says that, thank you, I appreciate that. She's saying that she appreciates my speaking and that this is not her area of expertise, but she's hesitant to comment. That's okay though. I really want to encourage everyone. The thing about all of this is that it's uncommon ground that is actually pretty common. Folks step into this arena, into trying to do this work and feel that because they don't know the experiences of others and they've not lived them, maybe they're not equipped to do the work. But in fact, that's the most important time to do the work. There are folks who've been using words like allyship, right? Be an ally. What does that mean? It really means being willing to do the work even when the inequities don't impact you directly. So I think that that's part of the work that has to be done. And I appreciate you, Laurel, and others for stepping into, even having this conversation and beginning this kind of discussion and thought process, even when it feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar. So thank you. All right, I'm going to continue on with the next part of our presentation so that I don't take up too much more of your time. So the thing that we would want to do, and that we've been really talking about here, is committing ourselves to some systemic change and action through diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion planning. And yes, the elephant in the room is, systemic change. Why systemic change? It is just that big. It's that important because systemic change helps to impact your policies as an organization, as an institution, your practices, your procedures on a daily basis, and even the interpretation work that you do should be impacted by the new planning and the new policies, procedures, and thoughts that you've done when you complete your DEAI plan. If you're not pushed into action and into change, then you haven't done the work. That's what's necessary. So what is systemic change? Again, AAM provides some really wonderful context and definitions for what we mean when we say systemic change. The reason, by the way, that I'm doing all of this work about sort of defining things is because I truly believe that words matter. That when we allow semantics and words and definitions to stand between us, we end up not doing anything often. But when we stand on the same ground with the same set of understandings, it really does give us a chance to work together in brand new and more effective ways. So let's understand together what systemic change is. The AAM says that sustained change at the structural level is what we're talking about when we say systemic change. Sustained change at the structural level. They also say that by prioritizing inclusion in your core operations, museums can ensure that progress is not just cosmetic or temporary, but that it's embedded into the systems that make you function. Literally, to embed this work into the things that help you be who you are organizationally. That is the key. I'd like to add that I think effective DEAI planning requires intentional actions, intentional changes, decision-making and policy implementation that will directly address and combat unconscious and implicit bias. It literally hits it on the head and says, we see these things as areas of bias. We're going to do these things in order to right those spaces, in order to balance things out, in order to provide the things that are needed in order to make sure that it's not just about equality, but that it pushes forward into equity and into a just and better system for everyone. The next piece of this is to think about the fact that without a real commitment to systems level change, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion plans really just collect dust. They sit on shelves, like strategic plans that sometimes sit on shelves and people go, wait, oh, it's 3 years in. Maybe we should go look back at that plan and see what we said we were going to do. You don't want a DEAI plan that does that. You want it to be an active plan that serves your organization. It's not a piece that you can sit on a shelf and then just say, we did that. Now let's go back to what we were doing before, back to business as usual, right? It becomes a part of what you do going forward. It shifts your organization into a place that is literally a better organization on the other side. Better because it includes policies and practices, interpretation that is so welcoming to your community, so broadens your audience, that it really does do the work of informing about the histories you're trying to share. And that is the goal of the planning for the history community here in New Jersey. I'd like to share with you one more thing, and I see that there's some other things in the chat. We'll get back to that in just a few moments, but I did want to share with you another thought or perspective on this, and that's this. There's a wonderful educator who came up with this term that began to be used a few years ago, and the term began to be used in writing and in the publishing world. Rudine Sims Bishop came up with this term and wrote a book about mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And it's an analogy to discuss the importance of diversity in books, especially for children and youth, but really for all of us, and the authors who write them. Right? The fact that we need books in which children can see their own reflections, but also that they can walk through those doors and enter into other worlds, not only to see their own experiences and to experience that through the writing, but that they can actually understand the worlds and experiences of other people. So those mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors are really important, even in the work that you will be doing in developing your interpretive work as a reflection of your new plans. If you go into this process and develop a plan that has action steps, that you understand what the path forward is, it's because you will have decided to make some very important inclusions in your work, and that will be reflected in what you do, how you interpret your histories. So let's listen to Rudine Sims Bishop for just a moment, as she talks about why she came up with this term and began to use this term about mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors.
The volume isn't on.
Volume isn't on. I may have to share my sound too. Let me stop. Thank you for telling me. Oh, there it is. All right. Let's start again. Let's see. Please do let me know if it's playing this time.
We need diverse books because.
Can you hear now?
We need
Yes.
books in which children can find themselves, see reflections of themselves. I wrote a piece, maybe in 1990 it was published, which I called Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors. And I think that's really why children need to see themselves reflected, but books can also be windows, and so you can look through and see other worlds and see how they match up or don't match up to your own. But the sliding glass door allows you to enter that world as well. And so that's the reason that the diversity needs to go both ways. I mean, it's not just children who have been underrepresented and marginalized who need these books. It's also the children who always find their mirrors in the books and therefore get an exaggerated sense of their own self-worth and a false sense of what the world is like, because it's becoming more and more colorful and diverse as time goes on. So I think that's why.
So those mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors are really essential to helping us be in a space where we are able to see that there are two sides, right? There's the side that is of those who often see their images are often mirrored, right? And there are those who so often don't and have to search for those opportunities to see themselves, their histories, their lives reflected. So I want to encourage us to sort of follow this wonderful quote by Aesop. It says, "Every truth has two sides. It is as well to look at both before we commit ourselves to either." And I want to share this image here as well of the tree with the two faces, one plentiful, the other barren. It comes from a conversation called Two-Sided by a gentleman named Pedro Perez. And Pedro works in the housing field and well respected at the national level, but he's based in North Carolina. And he talked a bit about his experience having been both in plenty and in want in the world of housing, and as it came to that. And so now that he is working in his role as a leader, he always keeps that in mind as he moves forward, because his experience in that and now his understandings help shape and form his actions moving forward. So I want to thank you all for just your attention and time today. I really thank you for the opportunity to have presented to you, and I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you. I guess I can ask anybody have questions, thoughts, anything. Sarah, did you want to take over? Anyone? Thanks, Jeremy.
I just wanted to thank Varissa for a terrific presentation and just kicking off this new grant program for us so very well. And please, I encourage any of you who'd like to ask her a question, please dive right in. I see there is one, Varissa, from Adriana in there. And then Sean, I'll turn it back over to you because I think you're gonna lead us through the next part. But Adriana Martinez is asking, do you have any suggestions on how best to reach the diverse audiences we may have? Now that sounds like a big question.
That's a huge question, Adriana, but it's really, really timely. And I think it begins with a survey of what you're already doing, right? Who is your audience currently? And who is in your community, right? Who might want to know more about what you're presenting, but maybe they don't feel that the presence of your institution or your work is for them. So the idea really is to start by thinking about what you're doing, what you're presenting, who your audience currently is, and about those who may be in your immediate area, right, in your immediate community, that you have easy accessibility to reach, and finding out from them directly, right, literally beginning to talk to them and ask them, this is the work that we're doing, here's the history we're presenting. What about this might interest you? It really begins with conversations. As you know, I find in everything that I do, it's all about the relationships that we build. I would suggest starting there.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay, Varissa is going to stay with us. So if you have any other questions that you'd like to pop in the chat, that would be fantastic moving forward. Now we're going to sort of segue into the more traditional workshop, grant workshop portion of this webinar. Let me just share my screen quickly. Just give me one moment. Okay. Let me know if you cannot see this. Everyone should be able to see this at this point. Okay, as you all already know, we are here for the launch of the New Jersey Historical Commission's Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion Grant Program. What is DEAI? And fortunately, Varissa spoke to very much of these first few slides already, but I'd just like to run through them quickly. Facing Change, Advancing Museum Board Diversity and Inclusion. There is a link to the DEAI Task Force Workbook. Again, all of these slides and these presentations will be made available to everyone who registered for the webinar. So please don't feel like you're going to be missing anything. And these are the AAM definitions that Varissa so effectively went over earlier. Here is diversity. Diversity is all the ways that people are different and the same, and the same at the individual and group levels. Even when people appear the same, they are different. Organizational diversity requires examining and questioning the makeup of a group to ensure that multiple perspectives are represented. Equity. Equity is the fair and just treatment of all members of a community. Equity requires commitment to strategic priorities, resources, respect, and civility, as well as ongoing action and assessment of progress toward achieving specific goals. Accessibility. Accessibility is giving equitable access to everyone along the continuum of human ability and experience. Accessibility encompasses the broader meanings of compliance and refers to how organizations make space for the characteristics that each person brings. Inclusion. Inclusion refers to the intentional ongoing effort to ensure that diverse individuals fully participate in all aspects of organizational work, including decision-making processes. It also refers to the ways that diverse participants are valued as respected members of an organization and or community. Why? Why is the New Jersey Historical Commission engaging in this program and launching it now? The Commission is committed to an ongoing, multifaceted strategy to make New Jersey history more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to diverse 21st century residents and visitors. By encouraging the use of new strategies for developing history programming, accessing audience engagement, and ensuring equity in the staffing and leadership of organizations, this approach will not only benefit history groups today, but create stronger institutions tomorrow. Where are we going? The creation of the DEAI Grant Program will provide the next vital step to ensuring our history stakeholders are implementing DEAI best practices in an effective manner. The DEAI Grant Program will lay the groundwork for the future, as the development and implementation of DEAI will be a future criterion for New Jersey Historical Commission funding. Our collective mission. The goal of the DEAI Grant Program is to establish an opportunity for eligible New Jersey history nonprofits to access qualified DEAI consultants to inform and train leadership while promoting best practices for institutional and programmatic diversity. Grants will be awarded to offset the costs associated for NJHC approved DEAI consultants to work closely with organizations to maximize success and welcome ongoing progress in these critical areas. Who can apply? This is very important. Any documented 501c3 nonprofit history organization based in New Jersey with an annual income of at least $50,000 in the last completed fiscal year and an active ongoing portfolio of history programming throughout the calendar year. And in the guidelines, this is referenced in the application package, page 2. Prospective applicants must also be up to date and compliant with state of New Jersey commercial recording and charities registration requirements. And again, right after this slideshow, we will have plenty of time to answer any questions that you may have. Eligible expenses and grant amount. The DEAI Grant Program funds can only be used to offset costs associated with the work provided by the NJHC approved DEAI consultants. The value of each grant is approximately $20,000, which will be used to pay the consultants that will be working with your organization. This will be the contractual obligation. Funds cannot be used for any other purpose. The next steps, if you apply for a grant and receive one, what happens? This is incredibly important. Are you ready to get personal? Grantees will receive unconscious bias training as an essential start to the project. This involves an examination of personal feelings and attitudes that are reflected in your behavior. Grantees will also receive an organizational analysis. This involves a deep look into your organization's policies and practices regarding everything from staffing, board recruitment, programming and interpretation, audience development, professional development, and more. How to apply. The good news is, and I think everyone here will be pleased to hear this, is that this is not going to be in Sage, so everyone can take a sigh of relief. Using the instructions on page 2 of the guidelines, and again, the guidelines are on our homepage under grant opportunities, history.nj.gov. You will use the guidelines to develop a narrative and submit the necessary support material. If you are a qualified organization of the New Jersey Cultural Trust, you may simply submit proof of qualification rather than submitting evidence of nonprofit status, financial documents, and public benefit. This was done after we got some feedback on our COVID-19 grant program from last year. The last thing we want to do as the New Jersey Historical Commission is to make things more difficult than they need to be. So we really try to make a conscious effort to streamline the process. And cultural trust qualification is basically everything that you would need to qualify for this grant program. So simply providing that will be good enough. This is important. Email your narrative and application materials, and this is all outlined in the guidelines, again, which are on our website, to this email, which is in the guidelines, njhc.programs@sos.nj.gov by 5 p.m. on December 6th, 2021. I look at that account multiple times a day. And just like with the COVID grant program last year, which was similar to this, you will get an email from me immediately saying that I have received your application and it has been submitted successfully. Now, just like to quickly go over sort of the most important part of what you're going to be submitting, and that is your narrative. So what you see in bold here is sort of a variation of each of the questions that you will be asked to answer. So one of them is, this grant is about learning and being open to change. Explain the nature of self-evaluation measures that your organization has taken. And some of the things to think about in terms of this specific question are below. How often do you review your strategic plan to assess if you are achieving your goals? Does your board or staff engage in self-evaluation? Do you evaluate your programming and audience response? And what do you do with that information? The second question is, what steps have you taken to broaden DEAI within your organization? Some of the things you may want to address. Have you formed an advisory committee? Have you altered programming or offered programming that is inclusive? Have you taken steps to diversify your board and staff? Have you formed partnerships or collaborated with other organizations? And have you had discussions with board and or staff? Where is your organization the strongest in terms of incorporating DEAI, and what areas need the most change? Some things to think about here. Have you or do you need to form a committee? Have you or do you need to diversify your board, staff, or programming? Have you or do you need to develop partnerships and or collaborations? And have you or do you need to have discussions with staff and leadership? Why is DEAI important to you? Some things to think about here. Maybe it aligns with your personal beliefs. Maybe it is important because of personal experiences. Maybe you believe strongly in social justice. Maybe it aligns with organizational mission and or programming, or maybe it is where you want to take your mission and or programming. Maybe it is important because of the impact of current events. All of these things are very important to think about when you answer this specific question. Who will be responsible in your organization for implementing these best practices? How will the leadership of your organization be involved? How will this be an organization-wide initiative? How will the project affect your organization's policies and program plans? And how will you consistently measure if you are achieving your goals? All important questions to think about when you respond to this narrative question here. How will you ensure that DEAI will be central to your organization's long-term planning and goals? You will develop a DEAI plan that includes goals, priorities, and implementation strategies. The plan will include such things as regular discussions with board and staff, development of advisory committees to ensure diversity inclusion on staff, board, audiences and programming, and consistent measurement of policies, governing documents, educational offerings, programming, and interpretation. Okay, and that is a quick run through of a slide show of basically what the guidelines will be asking you to do and what you will be required to do if you do decide to submit an application to the New Jersey Historical Commission. And with that, I will be happy to, I see that the chat has become very, very active. So with that, Sarah, I see you have already answered some questions here about the cultural trust. Any other questions that anyone might have?
Hey, Sean, it's Mike Ruane from
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Doing very well, thank you. Question for you, will these slides be available to us?
Yes. You have, when you registered for this webinar, you had to give an email address. I will make sure that all the slides that you have seen from the beginning, from 1 o'clock to the current period right now, will be provided to anyone who wants it.
Perfect. And could you do me a favor, Varissa, I'd like to talk to you offline if I could. Sean has my email. If you could just give me a call and we can connect.
Yeah,
because I want to talk to you about a problem we've been having for a number of years.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to put my number and email address into the chat, so you can also email me directly. Okay.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Sean.
No problem, Mike. Anybody else have any questions regarding the specific program or?
Sean, this is Angelica Santamaro from the American Labor Museum.
Yes, hi.
Hi. So the points that you made about, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, I feel as though that's so deeply embedded in the Labor Museum's mission. And it seems to be carried out through our programming, through our board, through so many components of our being. And so if we feel as though we can actually write up something that shows how we are in alignment with DEAI, is there still a need to apply for this grant in order to get future funding from the New Jersey Historical Commission?
Well, those are two questions. Is there still a need to apply for a grant? I would say yes. I would say there's always a need to apply a grant for something this important and this critical and this topical, and something that will be an ongoing and sort of cornerstone focus of the New Jersey Historical Commission moving forward. The second part of your question is that, and Sarah can hop in it as well, is this is an ongoing process. Whether or not you apply for a DEAI grant here or you don't, it will have no bearing on any grant program that we're doing immediately. In the future, it absolutely will. We've done this with strategic plans, ADA plans, things of that sort. So eventually moving down the road, and I know all of you should have gotten an email from me, all that are current GOS recipients. We're going to be moving again to accept new applications, I believe, in calendar 2023. So what the future holds, I can't say specifically, but eventually it will absolutely be a necessity and a requirement for receiving New Jersey Historical Commission funds.
Sean, I just want to make a distinction. I'm going to draw that line a little bit deeper, if I may, and that is that what we're saying is that having a DEAI plan is going to become a requirement for.
Yes.
Right? Not that it's going to be a requirement that you get a grant from this program to create that plan. Do you see what I'm saying? So
yeah, so sorry if yes. So
I just want to make sure you so because we don't actually have enough funding to give everybody one of these grants. So
okay.
We did. So we're not saying to you that if you don't get one of these grants, you're going to be out of the running. No. If you have other means to do this work and create your plan, then, by all means, you should use those resources to do it. So I just want to make sure that distinction is clear. And if there are other questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think Sam Stevens was next. I know he had raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you. In the past, the Historical Commission's requirements for applicants for a grant, besides the dollar amount and programming and so on, have been around staff, specifically whether there were employees as opposed to consultants, and at particular levels. Does that criterion still apply for eligibility for these grants?
For the DEAI program, or are you talking about moving forward for future?
No,
grants?
I'm talking about this particular program.
Sure. Let me just bring up that slide again. I believe it was $50,000.
Right, and that you have eligible programming.
Yes,
and so on.
You have an active portfolio of New Jersey history programming.
Right, but in the past, other Historical Commission grants have indicated that there needed to be employed staff, not consultants, and at a certain level, at least if I remember correctly. I may be wrong, and maybe I'm thinking about another funder, but I wanted to be clear whether that was still a criterion for this grant, this particular grant.
I don't believe it is, Sam, right?
No.
Sean? Yeah.
No.
So, and I just want to make sure, because I know it gets confusing. So no, there's not a staffing requirement of paid staff for this one. It's a budgetary requirement. And what we did here was to try to make this as accessible to as many groups as possible, because we know that this is such an important topic, and we want to make sure that we can help as many various groups as we can. And I think the program, Sam, that you're thinking about, where we were requiring at least one staff person, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was the COVID relief program.
Correct. That was the COVID-19 grant program relief grant that we ran last year.
Yeah.
But there is no staffing requirement for the DEAI.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question, which has to do with the dollar amount? We get lots of money. We're so lucky and so grateful to various funders for projects in addition to our operating budget. Can we count the project grants in as a part of our 50,000 plus, criterion?
Sean, I'm going to suggest to Sam that maybe he might want to have a separate conversation with you, so you can look at what.
Absolutely, I'd have some more specific questions about the nature of these projects and
right, yeah. Because for example, if you're running a capital project, I would say no. That doesn't.
No, these are not.
So yeah, why don't you and
I will
Sean
follow up with Sean. Thank you. Thank
definitely.
you very much.
We have a question from Susan Gogan. It's in the chat. Do you guys see it?
Mm-hmm.
It's about the consultants.
Oh, okay. And Susan, I'm going to start, but I'm going to let Nicole and Sean finish. And that is that actually we are going to identify the consultant for you in this particular program. Okay. So this is not a program where you can say, I found this consultant and please give me money to use that consultant. Mm-hmm. We've designed this differently. And part of the reason why we did that is because we really wanted to support the history community in a very immediate way, because our feeling was that a lot of you probably don't have a connection to a consultant that does this work. You probably haven't looked for and spoken to different consultants. So we're doing that work for you.
Okay. We just finished an RFP this week. So.
Okay. So, and you know,
I'll put it in as an attachment, maybe.
Sure, sure. And you may, Susan, maybe you'll decide that, well, for Wheaton, this isn't the right program. We're going to do it a different way, and that's fine. Okay. But for this project, we were trying to do a lot of the work for you guys.
Yeah, it sounds kind of nice, actually.
And find the consultant for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mike Moran from Middlesex County. I just want to I just want to clarify. Sorry about that. I just want to clarify that this is my understanding of 501c3 nonprofits is that governments do not qualify for this. Would that be a correct assumption? Agencies of government would not qualify for this grant application.
Sean, I'm going to pop in and say, I think, yes, I don't think we were contemplating that our fellow public agencies would be applying for this fund.
All right. But
your grantees could apply.
But your grantees absolutely can. And also if it's a county-owned site, Mike, and there's a friends group, a nonprofit friends group there that's actually doing the programming, they could apply.
Yes, I'll put together a list of the eligibility and I'll pass it along to all our local re-grantees from Middlesex County. I just wanted to clarify that before I sent it out to them, since a couple of them are also government public agencies. So I wanted to make sure before I sent it out to them. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and so I'll just throw in to the rest of the counties. I know there are a couple of you on the webinar here. So yeah, absolutely, your re-grantees would qualify. So if you could send along any information that I passed on to you or send links to our website, that would be great.
And I see there was a question from Deb Levinson. Will applicants who haven't done much formal work in this area be penalized in the point system? No. Well, no.
I would say no, and then you hesitated, Sean.
No, because I saw Sarah. No, yes. So the answer is absolutely no. We welcome anyone who is just committed to this critical and vital issue and has concern for their organization. Just making sure that its sustainability and viability is strong moving forward. And this is going to be an absolute cornerstone, like I said, initiative of the New Jersey Historical Commission. So the answer would be no. It's the intent and wanting to make these these important changes to your organization and programmatic offerings.
Exactly. I think as Sean put it very well, we recognize that many of us in our organizations are at the beginnings, just taking the first steps along this path. So if that describes your organization, that's not going to penalize you. It's, as Sean was saying, but you should be thinking in answering those questions, how you can demonstrate and communicate that your organization has made a sincere commitment to really following through on this, not just doing this, as I think Varissa's presentation, talked about this too, that it's not just window dressing, that it's not just temporary, but rather it's that you're really committed to systemic change, even if you haven't made that change yet. And the whole point of this program is to provide you with the tools to be able to really start making those changes. So I would say, I'm going to expand a little bit more on that. For example, that question about who in your organization is going to be responsible for following through on this. That's a really important question for y'all to think about in applying for it, because you need to think about what resources has your organization committed to really following through on creating the plan and then implementing it. So that, for example, is a really important question to think about.
Great. Are there any other questions? And please, I cannot stress enough, after this webinar, if you have a question, please reach out to me directly. I'll be happy to help you out any way I can.
I had a question that, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead, Izzy.
Was in the process of typing it in the chat, but realized it might take too long if things were wrapping up, so I'll just verbalize it. So keeping in mind that we all want to have written DEI plans that we can reflect upon and use as benchmarks as we move forward, is, I guess, digging more deeply into the work that the consultants who are engaged through this specific grant program would do. Is the intention that they would, at the end of their engagement, provide us with a customized written plan for our institution, or are they providing us with, a reflection based on their audit of our practices that we then, that isn't necessarily a DEAI plan per se, but that we then take to the place that we would need it to be for an actual plan? Is this findings or is it a plan, I guess is my question, in terms of what results from this engagement?
So I'll start my answer, but maybe I'll throw it over to Nicole in just a moment and say, Izzy, that we, Nicole, not me, Nicole and Sean have been working very, very hard to speak to a variety of consultants and to investigate a number of different resources to understand, the overall the cost of creating a DEAI plan and what's really involved in it. And from their research, Nicole, I think what you have discovered that, with the funding that we have available, we wouldn't actually be able to fund that many organizations to get all the way to a finished plan in this first year. So I think our goal with this is to get you started with the two first really important steps that Varissa, I think, was describing, that implicit bias training to get all of your stakeholders kind of on the same page, and then that institutional assessment. But Nicole, you can provide maybe a little more detail.
Yeah, so it's definitely been it's been a little bit of a difficult experience because we have so much money, as Sarah said, and it'll only go so far. So I think originally we wanted to see that the consultants were going to work with you on the training, the bias training and the assessments, and then get you to the plan and do the plan. I think what's probably going to happen is that they're going to do the training, the bias training, and do the assessment of your organization, and work with you on that, and then give you the tools to write the plan yourself. And so I'm sorry if that was unclear. We're sort of putting the guidelines together at the same time as we're getting the consultants. So it's a little bit of a learning experience on our part too.
And obviously this is a very different kind of grant program than our usual ones. And so we're learning right along with you. And one of the things we're going to look at is maybe we do a round 2 next year where we could provide support to actually, create the plan now that you have prepared yourself to do. So we're going to learn from you just as you're learning from your consultant. And we'll make those decisions as we see how this all unfolds. But I think, Nicole, what we're definitely projecting is the scope of work for every grant recipient here is going to include that implicit bias training as well as that institutional assessment.
Yeah, those are two definite components. And then we've also, Sean and I have been talking to a lot of consultants, and we've said, so I think pretty much all of them, that it's definitely a learning process for us as well. We want to learn through your projects so that we know how to respond and what we need to do. So yeah, it's definitely, it's a training and learning project for everyone.
So with that in mind, in terms of, the grant deadline in April 2023 is not that far away, and us as GOS grantees thinking ahead to that, if a DEAI plan will be required for that, would you recommend that we simultaneously start looking for support to convert these findings into a plan, should we be lucky enough to be a recipient of the grant in the first place? Or would the requirements of the 2023 grant deadline be adjusted based on the nature of the support that the Historical Commission is able to provide within the next year?
We are modeling our approach to this very much on the approach that we took with ADA plan requirements a number of years ago. And what I mean by that is we understand that to create a thoughtful plan for either ADA or for DEAI is a process that takes time. So we will most likely, and again, the guidelines for the next round haven't been approved, so things could always change, but I think probably in this next round, what we'll be looking for is very much what we did with ADA, which is to say, please provide either a DEA plan, or you need to provide a description of the process that you're currently engaged in to create that plan. So if a year from now, a year and a half from now, when you're applying, you haven't finished the plan, but you've got a working board committee and you've been meeting for 6 months, and if you can demonstrate that you're seriously working on it, that's going to be fine to meet the requirement. Does that make sense? So in other words, we understand it's a process, and what we'll be looking for is, as we did with ADA, sincere commitment to being in that process for GOS applicants.
Yeah, that it's on your radar, and it's been firmly in sort of the bloodstream of your organizational operations and discussions for the past several months.
And I think even in the early days of ADA, we accepted draft ADA plans, for example.
We did, yes.
In process, but that demonstrated that the organization was really working on it.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
Very clear.
So we don't want to create anxiety.
Yes, that's the last thing we want to do. Please do not.
Nor do we want you all to rush out to create a plan in a that isn't really a good plan because you just slapped it together to apply for the grant. So, embarking upon a thoughtful, logical process and demonstrating that that's what you're in the middle of is what we're looking for.
I mean, it's April 2023 is still a ways away. There can a lot can be done in that time.
Yeah. Right. Especially we hope with funding from this project to take you on those first steps toward it. And the other thing, well, I could just keep going on this. The other thing is just like ADA plans, they should be revisited on a regular basis. So, you maybe in the next year and a half, we hope you do create a plan. And then, before you apply for your GOS 3 years from then, you should have revisited it and have updated it and adjusted it to reflect, changing conditions. I'd be interested before we have a whole 8 minutes, right? Would love to hear if anyone wants to chime in with just any reactions to the plan or the program, and if anything seems challenging, or if if your organization was looking for support for this. Anybody have any reactions you want to share with us, since it's so brand new to all of us? Anybody thrilled it's not in Sage?
Somebody actually said that he was.
Jody is
in the chat.
He gave me 2 thumbs up.
Yeah. Oh, I also see Sarah. Noelle posted some other important commission-related deadlines coming up.
Oh, great.
For everyone to take note of.
Yes, I would love to invite everyone to a program we're having on December 1st. We'll be having speakers from Lawnside. It's called Lawnside, New Jersey's first incorporated Black town. It's free. It's going to be on the evening of December 1st. And we're going to have local historians from Lawnside and community workers sharing their experience with us. So we would love to invite all of you and your friends to that discussion. And the Mildred Berry Garvin Prize deadline is coming up on December 1st. So please be sure to nominate your the folks you know who are doing an excellent work teaching and curriculum planning around African American history. And of course, just finally, I'm sure many of you are on the mailing list, but this is the link to the mailing list for the New Jersey Historical Commission. So you can be apprised of all of our programs and various initiatives that we're a part of, as well as the work of our partners. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Noelle, for reminding us of all of that. And I'm going to add one more commercial, and that is that if you didn't attend our webinar on Wednesday, in which we introduced the results of our survey of K-12 social studies education in New Jersey, we will be posting the recorded webinar, but you can go to our brand new website right now and dig into all those findings. So please do. It's www.njsocialstudies.org. So there is a treasure trove of data that we collected about social studies education, and I really recommend it to you highly. I hope you dig in and discover much. And we, on every page of the website, there's an opportunity for you to link in if you want to be in continuing conversations about different initiatives that we can, as a history community, develop to respond to those findings. So please also sign up to work with us on developing, the next stages of work that we can undertake together to strengthen and enhance social studies education in New Jersey.
Right. Any other questions? You can.
Oh, and now I'll put it in the chat. Thank you, Noelle.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Sure. Happy Friday, everyone.
Oh, I do see Jeremy just posted a question.
And that's a really good question. I don't know if you have any, Varissa, you want have any thought? I mean, this is the challenge, right? This is the challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great and important question to think about your demographics, right, in your area, and think about how you find representation. But again, I'll go back to the answer I gave earlier, right? It's about the relationships that you have. So maybe you have a relationship with your local YMCA because maybe you offer programming. Maybe there's some Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or a venture crew that come to your building on a regular and use your space. And there are leaders there who are diverse leaders. Maybe there's someone, again, it's your local bank, a restaurant owner, a business owner somewhere. Maybe there's a really, really dedicated mom, right, of students who often visit or live or work in your area. The idea is to think about the relationships that you have that may yield some diverse people that you know, and it's okay to ask other people too, right? It's okay to say, you know what, we're really looking to diversify our board. Do you know anyone who might be interested in this? And to ask that to the partners and others that you work with, because just because your circle may not have all of that doesn't mean the other circles and the networks of people that you work with. And I will tell you this, here's the other thing I really believe in because I see it working, right? Social media can do a lot. It's okay to post on social media. We are looking to diversify our board. Here's our mission. Would you be interested? And see what you get back, because you might be surprised who responds, right? So I think that we can use a lot of different ways to begin to do that diversification of the folks who are helping us to do what we do and who are helping to lead our organizations. It just takes some thoughtful work and planning to think about who you can reach out to, because it doesn't have to all live in you. There are other resources and people to work with. I hope that's helpful.
So, can you hear me? I'm not sure if my microphone's on. Okay,
we
wonderful.
Can hear you.
So I'm with Lucy the elephant. If you're not familiar with Lucy, you know, Lucy's her own little creature. And of course, our audience is very diverse. We have people from all over the world, all over different cultures. And Lucy is one of those places where she unifies people. There is no one specific group that we market towards or that we're trying to pull in and deepen their understanding of the history. But you know, we're talking Margate, New Jersey, which is, you know, Lucy is responsible for the development of this area because of the way the middle class was brought out. And so with that being said, we have a very, very, very clear demographic of the town. And our board is comprised of both city appointed board members and volunteers at the organization. And so trying to find that diversity is a challenge. We've been trying to do that. I mean, we have women represented on our board, and our president is a female. And we have members of the GLBT area, that our whole arena. And so it's one of those things where we do have certain underrepresented groups involved. But there's certain ones that I'm just concerned we're not going to be able to incorporate because they just aren't there per se. And I don't know how exactly to say that. I mean, I think, like I said, it's like 2% minority other than white in this entire town. And so how do you reach people that aren't even there in the first place?
Again, I think that the thing about it is sometimes we believe that the diversity that we need isn't within our reach. But because Lucy is so loved, there are a lot of people who are invested in the fact that you exist. I mean, you've met some challenges where maybe that wasn't going to be the case, where Lucy's still here, right? And so people rally to that. I think you need to, you know, again, begin to look at the folks who've done that. Are they educators? Is there a superintendent of schools who really made sure that their district came out to support Lucy during the pandemic or before, and again, starting to do so afterwards? Is there a, an education manager somewhere who manages social studies, a teacher? So, you know, we have to think about the folks who we see and know are interested in the work that we do, but who may not feel that they have a place to serve in that role until you invite them. Right, until they're invited. And so, there's a lot more work and conversation to be had about that. I would say, Jeremy, we begin at the beginning, right? Think of who you know, think of the folks you come in contact regularly, and start with one person, right? Nobody's saying that you have to start by adding 10 new people, 5 new people to your board, but there is an important thing to begin, right? The first step is the most important. Right? So beginning with those first steps that actually lead you to a place where you begin to see change, right? And then those folks who are part of your change, they will also be helpful in helping you to reach to others, right? But you got to have a plan and know where you want to go before you can get there. You have to know where you are right now. That's why the assessment is really important. And you have to know where you want to go before you can get there.
Thank you. I really appreciate you talking about that. We can have a side conversation at some point, just to kind of dive into this a little bit deeper. Because, like I said, I think my biggest concern is how do you represent everybody without knowing who you need to be represented by, or needs to be represented, or organization. So
it is that is a huge conversation. Yeah, and feel free. My contact is in the chat. Feel free. I know Sean and Nicole and Sarah have it as well, so feel free to reach out if you'd like.
And Jeremy, also, I think the concern that you expressed is one that I've heard from many history organizations. And I think that this grant program and actually the opportunity it offers to work with a consultant to really tackle those questions. I mean, that's an ideal kind of question that this program can help you work through.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. So I think that, and you're not alone. I hear that a lot from organizations. And Varissa, I think you gave a great answer. It's relationship building. It's really looking at those circles of relationships that you already have and then expanding beyond them to reach, to create those new connections that you don't presently have. But a consultant through this program can really, I think, help guide you with some strategies for that.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right. Wow, we're 4 minutes over now, right? This is terrific. Sean, you want to close us out?
Sure. Varissa, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much for your outstanding presentation, for everything that you brought to the fore today. It was so very important. I know I speak on behalf of Sarah, Nicole, Noelle is here on behalf of the commission staff that is not here. We cannot thank you enough. Thank you. And it really warms my heart to see the great turnout today. Especially I see a lot of, there was a great mix of current GOS recipients and some names and some organizations and some emails that I didn't recognize. So it was a wonderful and diverse group of people taking part. And again, any questions you have, feel free to email myself or Nicole. And like I said, any questions before December 6th, we'll be happy to answer. So with that, thank you so much, everybody. I will be sending around everything that you saw in the last hour and a half to the emails that you registered with. So no worries there. We'll hope to get those to you first thing Monday. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.